Good evening, this is 9 p.m. You're with India Development Debate on ET Now, and straight to the big debate that we're doing this evening. Big relief for the government over the Aadhaar linking drive. The Supreme Court on Friday refused to order an interim stay in the process, leaving the decision to the Constitution bench, which will start hearing the case later this month. The top court, however, pulled up banks and telcos for creating panic among their consumers with innumerable number of text messages on mandatory Aadhaar linking. And in some good news for the public at large, the government informed the apex court that it could consider extending the deadline for linking Aadhaar with mobile numbers and bank accounts.
Now remember, as things stand, one has to link his bank account with Aadhaar by the end of December this year, while the deadline for linking Aadhaar with mobile phones is the 6th of February next year. Ahead of the crucial hearing in the Aadhaar versus right to privacy case, we at ET Now put to test some critical issues on the Aadhaar drive, with focus on the legal, privacy and security issues to be specific. The big Aadhaar standoff is our first topic on the India Development Debate this evening. I'm Supriya, Shrinate in New Delhi, and joining me in Mumbai is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthi. Let's take you straight across to a stellar panel that's joining us to debate Aadhaar right here on the India Development Debate. Then we've got Pranesh Prakash, Policy Director at the Centre for Internet and Society. We've got Raman Chima, lawyer and co-founder Access Now, Asim Jakar, Director Research, Payatu, and Nikhil Kumar, Head Partnerships and Alliances, iSpray. Thanks very much each one of you for being with us. Nikhil, let me just begin with you. This is really a verdict that has left many confused. Do you believe this is a big shot in the arm for the pro-Aadhaar camp, the fact that the Supreme Court has not given a stay on linking of Aadhaar with banks and mobile phone connections?
Yeah, I think we have to view this judgment in the context of, what is the real benefit of linking Aadhaar with either a bank account or a SIM card. I think the Supreme Court has taken cognizance of this, that there is definitely some merit, and the reason behind doing this is probably the RBI has its own reasons, TRA has its own reasons. I think the fact that the Supreme Court has very clearly accepted this thing to be done and are now talking about whether the timelines are right, whether the operating guidelines are in place, whether, also the comment on the telcos and the banks and the way they've been communicating these to these customers. I think the Supreme Court has taken a great cognizant view that it is required. And I think from here on we'll have to see what the constitutional bench has to say about the Aadhaar issue on a whole.
Pranesh, comment on that. Is that how you're reading the observation by the Supreme Court today? Because, it appears at least as if the Supreme Court is now going more into implementation of the linking. Is the messaging right? Are consumers being confused? Is there panic being created? Not so much into, I know the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court will look at the substantive matters of the case, but how are you reading the observation made by the Supreme Court?
I think the Supreme Court justices recognize, as do all the rest of us, or most of us at least, that Aadhaar is a fait accompli at this point in time. More than 1 billion people have been provided Aadhaar numbers as per UIDAI, and it would be very difficult at this point to really order a stay of any kind, and that's what the Supreme Court has done today. They have recognized that the substantive issue of the constitutionality and other kinds of legality of the Aadhaar Act are currently at question, including the way that it was passed as a money bill, even though it's being used, as in this case, with SIM card linkage on something that has nothing to do with government financing, and similarly with bank linkage as well, that has nothing to do with outflows of monies from the government's accounts. So all these questions are before the Supreme Court, which will have to decide it. Today's hearing was essentially saying, please provide us interim relief because many people, such as myself, for instance, I don't have an Aadhaar number, and would be put to quite some difficulty if by the time the 31st December deadline comes about, the court hasn't fully heard or come out with a decision. Then I would have no choice in order not to violate, in order to be able to access my own money, but to get an Aadhaar number. So in order not to do that, I hope that the court at least expedites its hearings.
Okay, Mr. Chima, if I may come to you, the fact that, you know, Pranesh thinks this is just fait accompli, after all, is how the Supreme Court is looking at the matter. But the Supreme Court has said that bring all of this before the constitutional bench, which is going to examine the validity of that case. Does that in some sense compound the confusion that you never know? Maybe that linking will not be required and maybe it will be required. I mean, does the confusion get compounded? Does the uncertainty only grow?
This is the thing to remember with all of these matters is that court proceedings have to follow the process and time.
Okay, I think there's a problem. I really think there's a problem with Raman Chima's audio there, but okay, I'll take that question up in just a minute from now. Or I don't know if Asim Jakar would want to ask that question. Mr. Jakar, just the same question. Does the uncertainty and does the confusion just get compounded, just that all add up?
Yes, I mean, from my perspective, I don't see the benefits of linking Aadhaar to everything that a user does. For example, linking it to your bank account, linking it to your SIM card. Um, if you ask me from my perspective, this becomes a broader surveillance program where you can, track the user anytime you want, given a single Aadhaar number. You have the travel details of the user, you have the call details of the user, you have the banking details of the user. Now, the problem with such a large system is that it becomes a single point of failure if you look at it from a national security perspective. So it may be good for the government from a surveillance perspective, but when you look at other nation states who are trying to do cyber espionage, it becomes, a gold mine for them if they can somehow get access to the one and only database.
Okay, Nikhil, I'm going to let you counter what Asim said on this whole fear of surveillance. I know we've done debates on that, a quick counter to that, but also I want to add the question on the one genuine concern that people have is on third-party rights, actions of third-party. And, even the court today expressed its reservations on that issue. The worry is that telecom companies, many believe, are using data to spam people with messages. And what are the means to really protect the rights of consumers? I mean, that's the big concern, isn't it?
I want to debunk some of these theories that have been floating around to say we have a national security issue, we have access to one single database, and so on and so forth. Till today, there is obviously no reported breach in terms of UADI itself, right, from the core data center perspective. The way the tech architecture is designed is that there are multiple failure points that have been designed. There is a big ecosystem called the ASA, AUA, and a KUA ecosystem in the way the tech and the operating ecosystem has been designed. Now, whenever people keep saying there is a national security issue, there is access to one single database, look, they don't still realize the amount of data that UADI has about a person is something very, very minimal. It has your name, it has your date of birth, it has your address, it has your photograph, it also has the copy of your encrypted biometrics, which is being used to generate the Aadhaar number and also to authenticate you. Now, this is a kind of information that even a Flipkart order that you make when they come and deliver this to your house, this is the kind of information that's available outside. So the real context of, this whole national security and so on is what is the consumer liability, or, what kind of liability do companies have in the term of a data breach? And this is not just to UADI, it is even to telecoms. So let's not forget that the way you got your SIM card when you enrolled, when you got your SIM card, when you got you gave your passport, you gave a multiple different identification documents, and then every call and every SMS that you send, every OTP that you have, the telco already has that data. right? So the real question to ask is like, what happens if the data leaks from the telco tomorrow? And that is exactly the right question that the Supreme Court is asking. That, you know, it's not, the problem is not really about Aadhaar or UIDI per se. It is about what happens in the context of a data breach. And I think the government has been one of the most proactive governments, and they have set up, like we discussed in the last time, Justice Sri Krishna committee, and today the AG also dutifully informed the court that the government is looking into this, and they have promised to deliver the draft regulation in terms of what the data protection law and architecture in India should look like by March next year. Right? So I think this whole trying to fearmonger people, and I think Supreme Court's you know, notice of is not just about banks and telcos, about all of these other stories which are running around to say if you link with your Aadhaar in your bank account, your money is gone. If you link your Aadhaar in your telecom data becomes accessible. Come on, like today your mobile number is your identifier in your bank account. If somebody wants to really create a profile of you, if you give your mobile number, I'll be able to tell you what did you shop on Flipkart, what meal did you order on Swiggy, you know, which transaction you paid through where, and so on and so forth. So mobile is really the identifier today. Now let's go, I just want to add one point on what is the importance of Aadhaar. The importance of Aadhaar is not for the consumer. The importance is for the telcos and the banks. I just want to complete this. Is the objective of this is to basically weed out duplicate connections that are already existing in the market. There is no way Pranesh can guarantee today that there is nobody else who's using a SIM card in his name.
Okay, fair point indeed. We do not know if anybody is using a SIM card in Pranesh's name. I would have loved him to counter this, but I think I lost the line with Raman Chima, so I'm just going to get him to quickly counter the points that you're making. And what Nikhil is really saying here, Raman, is that a lot of the data that you've shared with Aadhaar is actually a lot less than what you share with your service providers or what you share with the online apps that you shop in. And so what is this brouhaha all about?
So that's a completely incorrect argument of surface. The reality is you should be concerned about all data, but when government collects your data, government's under an even stricter burden, and that's the challenge with Aadhaar. It is collecting vast amounts of data. Nikhil is incorrect in what he mentioned UIDI has. UIDI also has a record of every single time our Aadhaar number has an authentication transaction. That means when a yes/no occurs. So they have a very detailed record of where you're going. And by the way, I'm concerned about what the big tech platforms carry. That doesn't mean that you go and say we'll create one more gigantic platform that collects data, and then you go by using the power of the state, you say every single private entity must use it. So for Nikhil, I want to make this point very directly clear. It's not the industry that went and said that you should link it to Aadhaar. It's the government that said we want to make it mandatory. It's the government that went and tried to claim that Aadhaar is better for all these purposes, for verification in telecom, for the issue about money laundering. And by the way, if the government was so convinced that both these mechanisms are so authentic and so effective, they could have done an open public consultation on it. They never did so. The only time that the UIDI has ever indicated they want to publicly speak about something is when they say, oh, the value of what we're doing. The Prevention of Money Laundering Act rules, by which Aadhaar has been made mandatory for account linking, were never issued for public discussion or comment. The telecom linkage issue was again never put up for public comment. It has been forced through. The reality, as what Pranesh hinted at the beginning of this discussion, is they're trying to make it too big to fail. They're trying to say it's mandatory everywhere, it's already there, now don't take it back. And today's hearing was basically that no, we will listen to this later this month, we will make a decision on what's going on here. The government came out and said that if the hearings take longer, we may update some of these regulations. These are not notifications, by the way. They are regulations issued by the government which go to Parliament. Parliament can change them. Parliament can issue comments on them. But more importantly, that means that if the government wants to change it, it's not the matter of one affidavit. The government needs to make a change in these actual regulations. And what the government offered today was, if the hearings go on longer, we may give an extension on the deadline. Okay. But let's wait and watch.
Okay, fair enough. Pranesh, comment on that, and I want to, in the court today, the government did make a point about the Justice Sri Krishna committee that's looking into data protection law as well, and minutes of that committee meeting alludes to the fact that there may be a need, possible changes to the Aadhaar Act to incorporate concerns on the data protection framework as well. Is that the key sort of thing that needs to be fixed here? If you have a strong data protection framework, then many of the concerns that you and Raman and everyone else is pointing out could be factored in the data protection framework. Is that the way to go about it from here on, given the fact that we've got a UIDAI with over 1 billion people on it?
Well, that's the least that can be done at this stage. Let's remember that discussions on data protection laws in India have been going on since at least around 2007, and there was a Justice A.P. Shah group of experts that brought out a report that recommended a law of this kind. Indeed, the UIDAI chairman at that time in 2010 wrote to the government calling for the need for a data protection law. Yet here we stand with more than 1.2 billion people having been required to provide their fingerprints and biometrics and iris prints to get Aadhaar, and yet we don't have a data protection law. And and when the Aadhaar Act was brought into place, we must recall that all the existing contracts didn't necessarily go through a new kind of vetting to see whether they complied with data protection laws, but were just deemed to continue to be enforced under the new Aadhaar Act. So that points to one core problem, where right now, when you go to a shop, say like a telecom provider, and you're providing your fingerprint in order to get authentication under Aadhaar, that transaction, as per the regulations, the telecom provider is not allowed to capture your biometrics. But they can ask you to do the same thing, provide your biometrics again, a second time, for their own purposes, and that's not regulated at all in India. So there's a clear lacuna here where the existing laws on data protection, like Section 43, are laughably feeble, and we desperately need a data protection law. And let me also make one other quick point on the issue of surveillance. While Nikhil is undoubtedly right that surveillance is not just about Aadhaar, and I have often concurred with him on the point that mobile phone surveillance is at some points far more intrusive than Aadhaar, and some rumors have been going around. For instance, the West Bengal Chief Minister wrongly claimed that if you link Aadhaar to your mobile phone, to your SIM card, that will enable the government and certain parties to listen into your phone calls. That is not true at all. But what is the case is that there are systems, for instance, like NatGrid, which themselves don't store much data, but they enable many different databases to be combined together to get a much better view of the activities of a person, whether with their consent or without. And it must be recognized that Aadhaar provides for these kinds of data points as well, just as other kinds of things like mobile phone number do as well.
Right. Valid point indeed. I think it's important also to clarify that, you know, the reasons to panic are perhaps unfounded for. So nobody's listening to your conversation if you're linking Aadhaar. You may have a certain issue with privacy there, and that perhaps is well taken into account. But Nikhil, you know, the Aadhaar Act very clearly says that it is illegal for data to be revealed or for data to be shared. But we still see government agencies slip here and there. What will you attribute this to? Is this perhaps bureaucratic apathy at best?
Yeah, I think, you know, I just want to counter to one point with Raman Chima made about that the Aadhaar system knows, you know, every detail in detail of all the transactions that you do, which is not true. Again, you know, Pranesh can probably clarify. We've looked, you know, the only detail UIDAI has is which agency performed this action, right? So let me give you an example. So the way Aadhaar system works is it's like GPS. So the system knows that you're on GPS, but it doesn't really know where you're going. So the log that happens in UIDI is essentially this, that tomorrow if someone misuses this particular thing for an authentication, they need to know from which source the authentication happened for. Whether you bought a SIM card or whether you bought an insurance, whether you bought a bank account, that detail doesn't go back to UIDI. So this is very important and I wanted to clarify. On the second point which you mentioned about the regulation, the Aadhaar Act, I described last time, is probably one of the most forward-looking laws in India which really talks about data protection. There is no real example that you can pick up in Indian laws which talk about data protection, and Aadhaar Act was the first step. Now, as I said, there is, the reason, and Pranesh's organization has done a lot of work around this. The problem that we realized that the government was facing, a lot of government agencies, is under the Transparency Act that they come under, they were forced to declare beneficiaries of certain programs that the governments were running. So whether it was farmer subsidy, whether it was LPG subsidy, or whether different scholarship subsidies in different states and so on. Now that is in conflict with the Aadhaar Act, which essentially says that the Aadhaar number of the person cannot be revealed, it needs to be stored in such a way, and so on and so forth. So I think this is, the good news is that we have detected this issue very early on, thanks to a lot of research agencies who worked in helping uncover all of this. I think, and I think the previous MeitY secretary had a very, very detailed press statement on this to say that the next goal of MeitY and UIDI together would be to enable a lot of these government organizations in terms of, storing and securing their data, not just Aadhaar data, but everything else, right? If you look at the governance itself, the kind of digitization that's going on in terms of government services, why is this being done? This is being done so that you get your service as
Nikhil, I'm going to interrupt you.
So that definitely puts them at risk.
Okay, Nikhil, I'm going to interrupt you. Let me get a word from Aseem Jakar on the point, the digitization and the potential upside of it, because just yesterday we had this data of of where the UPI has crossed 75 million transactions in just 1 year, and so this argument will get thrown on the upside that this could bring about, in terms of digitization. There is the talk of how the jam trinity combination of Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile could leapfrog India into a $6 trillion economy as well. So is this mandatory push in a sense going to enable that, and how would you counter this argument being made?
Okay, I'll talk a little bit about what Nikhil spoke as well, and maybe try to answer this in that. So one of the presentations from UIDAI mentions that it has a foolproof system to ensure both security and privacy of residents. And Aadhaar data is fully secure and not vulnerable to any attacks. Now, these two statements are very, very bold statements for any organization to say, because from my more than a decade of experience as a security researcher, I have never seen a single system that is foolproof and not vulnerable to any attacks. Okay, so all the arguments that are based on the security of Aadhaar, pro Aadhaar, they are that the Aadhaar data is very secure, and you have encryption, and you have firewalls and intrusion prevention systems. I fail to understand how does that make the Aadhaar system secure. B, what about the third parties? What about the fingerprint scanners? What about the iris scanners? What about the softwares that are used? What about the system security of those third-party agencies? I can't find any document that says that these hardware and software have been diligently tested, and what were the vulnerabilities that were uncovered in these devices, and how they have been replaced, if there were any vulnerabilities found. Now, talking about, again, coming back to foolproof system, we have seen many examples of data breaches, not just private sector, but government as well. You take an example of US NSA. There have been many breaches in their organization as well. Now, I would like to make one point here that the US Department of Defense ran a program called Hack the Pentagon, where 1,410 hackers from US registered. 200 reports were generated in the first 6 hours, and the first vulnerability was found within 13 minutes of starting the program. and 138 vulnerabilities were unique, which were reported among that. So if had Department of Defense not done this exercise, how would they deem their system to be foolproof or not vulnerable to any attacks? Now, how many people in one particular organization look at the security of the system? 5, 10, 15, 20, 100? Not more than that. But if you open up, let the security community come in and review the security posture of the organization or the system, I think that can really help out rather than just blindly saying that it is not vulnerable to any attacks.
Actually, that's a valid point indeed. I mean, how will we know if it's hackable and vulnerable if you're not going to let it be exposed to something like this? But Raman Chima, we'll let you have the last word on the show. Then, I mean, you can keep that argument aside, but has the government got its entire communication on Aadhaar wrong? Because now everybody is looking at Aadhaar with some sort of a suspicion. Whereas it was not supposed to be meant to be this way. It was supposed to be a unique identification for every Indian, biometrics involved. But has the communication undone Aadhaar also?
See, it's not just the communication, right? It is a bit of intention and the willingness to acknowledge other people's points of view might be correct, their perspectives might be valid, and to engage with them. Instead, the push has been to say that no, everything is fine, there is no problem here, move along, or to spend massive ad campaigns and blitzes on saying everything is fine, link Aadhaar to what you're doing. If, for example, the UIDAI and the government had spent as much money as it has spent on promotion, as it spent on big activities saying link this, do this, or big events with India Stack, the group that, for example, Nikhil works with, if they instead spend that money on hiring more officers, talking to people, organizing discussion in the regulations, we'd be in a better place. Asim had a very valid point, for example, on security. They have made extraordinary security claims, and having worked in the tech sector myself, I can mention that if you do this, you have to back up what you're doing with proof. Instead, despite the concerns that many people have mentioned about the UIDAI, about the potential security threats and breaches that might occur, the response has been to say not only that we're not going to really engage with you, they issued regulations saying their cybersecurity policy itself is confidential and denied under RTI. So there seems to be a fundamental philosophy challenge here, not just an issue about communication. They seem to be believing we shall be as transparent as you can be with citizens' data, we shall not be transparent ourselves. People's Aadhaar numbers might and will be seeded by state governments across the country, not by the way because the RTI Act requires it, but because state governments want to link it and because the UIDAI has been saying seed this number everywhere. We won't be transparent about what we do, and that's what they must fix and address right now. The time isn't there for dramatic statements by government lawyers in court or by big ad blitzes. The time is to say we may have made mistakes, let's try and fix it. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that so far.
Okay, fortunately we haven't seen that so far. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time. This is a debate where you just can't get any sort of consensus. You have polarized views, and maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Hopefully the government will find the middle ground on this contentious issue of Aadhaar and help it unleash the true potential of the Indian economy without compromising on the privacy rights of the citizens of this country. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us in this leg of the India development debate.
Indeed, thanks very much for being with us this evening. We take a quick breather and we come back and put the spotlight on another riveting debate, the state of Indian states. Is there a social progress that lies outside of economic growth? We come and put the spotlight on the social progress index. India lags behind. As soon as we return, you've got to stay with us.